Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 8 of our reading of Pandora's Genes. It is a novel by Kathryn Lance. It is also part of a trilogy, with the second book being Pandora's Children and the third being Pandora's Promise. So if you like this book and want to get yourself a copy, then it is for sale at most retailers, probably, or at the library or something like that. Anyways, we're going to, as always, go over the copyright information. Copyright 1985 by Kathryn Lance, all rights reserved, and I have the author's written permission to read this book on my channel. In the last part, we found out that the matriarch, or the leader of the garden, was actually Zach's mother. And we found out a little bit about the principal, and found out that there were outlaws and a new cult, or a new religion, that is very militaristic and basically causing problems in the Southwest. General Ralph reported this to the principal, who is like the president or the higher up guy. Anyways, we are going to pick up where we left off, and that's a conversation between General Ralph, and the principal, who is the head honcho. But yeah, General Ralph rode on ahead, and the rest of the party is with the refugees that got burned out by this new cult. Within 2 days, said Ralph, with the invalids and refugees, our way was slowed. I rode ahead because we all agreed you should know as soon as possible what had happened. Yes, of course, and thank you for doing this. How long have you been without sleep? I'm fine, sir. You are exhausted, and you will be rewarded for your service after you've had a meal and a good night's sleep. The principal paused, then spoke the words he knew he had to say next. As for your primary mission, I gather you were not able to continue on the route that Zach had followed. For a very long moment, the old man just looked at him, eyes big and frightened in the exhausted face. It was on the same day we met the refugees, he said slowly. We came upon what had once been a campsite, but obviously ruined. There were broken branches, weapon marks, signs of a struggle everywhere. We found indications that a man had camped there and a woman, a bit of a torn cloak, a pipe with the new smoke still tamped in it. And after a little searching, we found these. Looking as if he expected to be struck, Ralph reached into his pouch and pulled out a comb carved of bone. He put it on the principal's desk. A woman's comb, said the principal. He picked it up. Nice workmanship, but nothing unusual, have you? He stopped. Ralph had reached into his pouch again and was holding another object. It was made from two curved pieces of polished dark wood, separated by a half a dozen taut strings. At one end, the strings branched into hundreds of brightly colored feathered fronds. Ralph laid the object silently on the desk, then stepped back and remained standing. The principal sat motionless, looking at the object, his mind rejecting what his senses told him was the truth. This was a feathered lyre, one of the rarest objects in the district. At one end of one of the pieces of wood was burned on the initial Z. This was Zach's feathered lyre. Finally, he spoke. You found nothing else? Nothing. You did not follow the trail? There was no trail, only the signs of a struggle and a ruined camp. The principal put the comb on the desk beside the lyre, where it gleamed orange in the fading light. He stared at the objects, not trusting himself to speak. A rage was building in him, a rage he had never known, and he did not want to take it out on the faithful Ralph. He took one deep breath, two, then three, and after letting out the last, looked up at the old man, who was terrified to be bringing such dreadful news. "That will be all, Ralph," he said, not recognizing his own voice as he spoke. Robin," he called. "Robin." Belatedly, he removed the bell at the side and rang it, and at last Robin appeared. "Give Ralph a meal and a good place to sleep. If he wants one, give him a woman for hire. Bring me more food and a pitcher of brew. Then do not disturb me again this evening. Tell the generals I will see them in the morning." Robin looked startled and opened his mouth to speak, then thought better of it. "Yes, sir," he murmured. The principal was aware that Ralph was waiting for a formal dismissal, but he knew he could not speak again. Finally, following the secretary, Ralph murmured, "I'm sorry, sir. Thank you," and followed the older man out the door. The principal raised his eyes from the desk now and turned to look out at the layers of sunset which were beginning to build in the sky. The colors spread and began to run together. He blinked, then stood and walked to the fireplace, where, using a flint and steel, he ignited the fire that he had laid for him. He started with difficulty, and he spent a long time at it. When the fire was glowing, he walked back to the desk and poured himself another full cup of brew. Then looked down again at the two objects on his desk, the comb and the feathered lyre. At last he picked up the lyre and, his hand trembling, plucked a string. The eerie, melancholy tone reverberated in the room, and he put the instrument down, damping the sound. Then he walked to the window and looked out at the darkening night. The stars began to appear. Chapter 4. When the principal awoke, he was twisted among the cushions on the wooden couch in his office. His head ached badly, and there was a foul taste in his mouth. Immediately, the thought came to him, Zach has disappeared. The faint light, just filtering through the east window, showed that it was still very early, before sunrise, and he closed his eyes, thinking to sleep more. But after a moment knew that he could not. The thought of Zach had filled his head, leaving room for no other thought or any rest, and he knew that everything was now changed for his own life, for his greater plans. This was as profound a change as had occurred 2 generations before he was born. He rose to one elbow and shook his head. "He is not dead," he said aloud, as if by his will he could make it true. In any case, whether Zach was dead or not, whether captured by outlaws or by followers of this mysterious new religion, it was clear that to the principal that he must investigate the situation in the Southwest as soon as possible, to protect his holdings there. This must be his primary mission. The second, which he knew would become an obsession, was to find Zach alive if possible, and if not, to discover who had been responsible for his death, and then to kill the man himself in the slowest, most painful way he could devise. He stood upsetting the pottery pitcher, which sat empty beside the couch. Irritably, he kicked it away and went to his room and washed quickly, not bothering to ring for hot water. The icy liquid began to sting his body awake, banishing the headache left by too much drink. Then, while almost everyone in his house still slept, he made his way downstairs to the great kitchen. There, he surprised 2 young cooks who, not expecting anyone so early, were trading stories and passing a pipe of new smoke while a large kettle of water boiled over the top of the stone oven. The sweet scent of the new smoke mingled unpleasantly with ancient cooking odors, and he stepped out into the herb garden off the kitchen to clear his head. When he returned and sat himself at the massive pre-change table in the center of the room, he found that the cooks, terrified of his famous temper, had had made a hasty botch of his breakfast, overcooking the pigeon eggs and failing to crisp the cured pork the way he liked it. After 2 bits, he shoved the food away and shouted for tea, which arrived too weak and too hot, and he burned his tongue. He hurled the cup into the fireplace, and finally, after the cup of tea had prepared properly, settled down to make notes of his meeting with the generals. The intended subject of the meeting had been the improvement of long-distance communication throughout the district, preparatory to expansion of the area firmly under his control. His plan was to establish line-of-sight signaling towers where possible and more communications stations with mounts and human runners in other areas. Although the hummingbirds, which had sometimes been used to send messages in the past, had not survived the change, he intended to begin working with some species of new birds to see if they could be trained to hum reliably. He reflected that communication might be more important than ever now, especially to the Southwest, but his resources were limited and he would have to be very careful how he committed them. Clearly, if this new religion was a genuine threat, he would have to train as many new troops as possible. He quickly estimated the number of young men recently conscripted and the greater number that could be trained in the next few months. While he worked on increasing his army, small scouting expeditions could begin to investigate more fully the reported trouble in the Southwest. For now, however, the important question was the most efficient use of the trained troops already in the capital. His generals, he knew, would have sharply opposing ideas. So as always, he would work out the best solutions with Zach before the meeting. Only Zach was not here. For a moment, the principal felt cheated and helpless, like a young child who cannot get an answer to an urgent question. In spite of his temper, he was on good terms with all his close aides, but to all of them he was above all the principal. Looked on with respect and awe, to all of them but one. The meeting with the generals did not go well. He had opened with the news of Zach's disappearance. The expression of shock and regret were not faked. Zach was well loved, and all his men knew how greatly the principal depended on him. But he saw looks of disapproval too. Even though Zach's mission had not been made public, it was common knowledge that on this one occasion the principal had not trusted his regular procurers, but had sent Zach instead. General Rolfe then told of his encounter with the refugees and the traitors. As the principal expected, the two youngest generals, Daniel and Eric, scoffed at the idea of any outlaws overcoming trained professionally led soldiers. "You haven't seen these traitors," Ralph said angrily, beginning to stutter. They care nothing for their life. It would take all our troops and more to subdue them if they have an army. Daniel, who had been with the principal since he was a boy, spoke slowly and with customary self-assurance, which sometimes approached arrogance. "Perhaps, then, it is time for the older generals to retire and leave fighting to men who are not afraid of any number of outlaws." Ralph rose to his feet, his mouth working in rage. "Sit down and shut up, both of you," snapped the principal. "Whoever these traitors are, they must be stopped, and we will stop anyone if we're fighting, and we won't stop anyone if we are fighting among ourselves." Still glaring at each other, the two men sat, Ralph muttering to himself. Once again, the principal missed Zach and his calming influence. No matter what the dispute, Zach seemed to always be able to find a solution which satisfied everyone. In the end, it was decided to send two small but well-armed parties under Daniel and Eric. The men under Daniel were to investigate the southwestern border area, while the other would scout around the northern ford. then moved southwest and joined Daniel's contingent. The evidence of the woman's comb indicated that Zach had reached the girl's home, but the principal wanted to make certain, so he assigned Red, a quiet, reliable man of Zach's age, to tend a third party in retracing Zach's route to the northern mountains. The principal did not give in to the temptation to order the purchase of the girl if by chance she were still there. That would have to wait until the current difficulties had been resolved. Ralph and Quentin, his oldest and most experienced generals, and Marcus, who was in charge of peacekeeping troops in the capital, would remain here and help train new men. After the meeting, as the principal began working out the details, he finally started to relax. He found he was able to think for minutes at a time without the thought of Zach's disappearance coming into his consciousness. One thing further remained to be done, which he had not mentioned in the meeting. It involved a secret contingency plan known only to himself and Zach. He had longed to put it into action for years. The news of the trouble in the Southwest might prove at last to be the excuse he had needed. Telling only Robin that he was leaving, but not why, the principal would make a short journey himself to the isolated peninsula just to the south and east of the capital. Though the principal was striking looking among men, few of his subjects would recognize him. As insurance, he would wear a false beard. Most men in the district did not shave. A clean face was another relic of civilization, which he affected himself and encouraged among his men. Of his closest advisers, only Zach and Ralph did not follow his custom. The principal set out in early morning on the best mount in his stables, his mind at rest for the first time since he had learned that Zach was missing. He knew that in some ways what he was doing was foolish and even dangerous, that he ought to take at least one or two men with him, but he felt a need and time to think alone. Also, though he did not like to admit it himself, he had felt for some time a restlessness building in him, an irritability which was a sign of the compulsion which overtook him from time to time. The failure of Zach's mission meant that he would not find release soon, but physical action might serve to quiet him. The compulsion was something he had long ago given up hope of controlling, and his position as principal had made it easy for him to indulge it. He was certain from his reading that this was not common in civilized men, and thought that it was perhaps due to a wild Dina. He also knew that any obsession continued unchecked could topple an empire no less surely than a revolution or a coup. He rode hard into the late morning, enjoying the clean air and the moist fragrance of the forest. His face under the false beard itched, but the idea of traveling incognito was exhilarating, as if the responsibility of his position had disappeared with the recognition of his face. It was easy to let himself slip back in imagination to the days when he had been an outlaw champion of the people, suffering under the president's despotic, chaotic rule. It was during the last days of that struggle, in fact, when he and Zach, fleeing the president's private police, had stumbled through the forest upon the remains of a great old estate hidden by wild and choking vegetation at the tip of a small peninsula outside the capital. They had rested there for over a week, waiting for their wounds to heal before rejoining Ralph, Red, and the other men in the tunnels leading to the city, preparing for the final assault. In some way, some days had been those days had been the best days of his life, when his destiny lay before him and everything still seemed possible. During that time, he and Zach had planned together the structure of the government they would build, setting priorities for establishment of sanitation, security, education. Neither of them had ever doubted, or at least had not admitted to doubt that they would indeed defeat the much despised president, a man who had seen the chaos of the world after the change only as an opportunity to grab personal power. The principal had always had in his head a grand outline of what he wanted to accomplish. It was Zach, as always, who methodically worked out the details. It was Zach, too, who had suggested possible future uses of the estate several times since the two men had traveled there, making certain that the buildings remained sealed and that no one had taken up residence. By early afternoon, the principal reached his destination and saw that nobody had disturbed anything since his last visit. With satisfaction, he surveyed the ancient house, a solid stone structure of 3 stories, showing the impeccable machine-aided workmanship common before the change. In addition to the great house, there were several smaller outbuildings and a large orchard which much overrun with weeds, but luxurious with healthy, fruit-bearing trees. All the buildings were in disrepair, but still intact, and it would not take a team of builders long to make them habitable again. Surrounding the entire compound was a solid stone wall. Again, most of it was in pre-change workmanship, and most of it still stood. A freshwater stream leading to the bay, which provided adequate water. Most important of all was the remote location of the compound. There was no sign that it had been visited for more than a short period by anyone in all the years since the principal had discovered it. Satisfied, the principal sat by the stream and had a meal of the dried meat he had brought with him and began to ride back to the capital. He had intended to arrive well before nightfall, but his mount's sluggish behavior indicated he had stayed at the estate too long, and it was growing late. This was not a well-populated area, but he had seen signs of some dwellings on the trip here, and he began to look for the telltale smoke that would indicate a cabin where he could ask for lodging. Presently, a narrow but well-worn path took him into a large yard, planted lushly with vegetables and fruit trees. Beyond the garden was a small cabin, which, with smoke just beginning to curl toward the sky. From the look of it, this would house a typical family, 2 or more husbands, a wife, and several boy children. As the principal rode into the yard, a small figure stepped through the door of the cabin, intent on some errand. The figure suddenly stopped, then straightened and put up a hand for shade, watching him approach ahead of the falling sun. As the principal drew near, he saw that it was a young girl with thick, pale hair tied in braids. She was not beautiful, but there was a freshness and openness about her. He felt his stomach clench and kept his voice steady as he spoke. "Good day. Does your family have room for a lodger for the night?" "I can't say," she said uncertainly. I have metal," said the principal. "If you'll send your fathers out, I'll settle with them." "They're not here right now," she said, something nervous. Quickly she added, "I expect them any minute. They've been out hunting." She glanced toward the cabin door, and from her manner, the principal suspected that her fathers would not be returning soon. He felt almost dizzy at this realization and told himself to go on quickly, to find another place to lodge, away from the girl. But suddenly she spoke again, her voice surprised. "You're the principal." At first he couldn't think of a reply. He had not expected to be recognized so easily, and certainly not by a child. After a moment he laughed. "I'm flattered that you think so, but in truth I'm just one of his soldiers." "I know who you are," she said with some intensity. "Last year my first father took me to the capital to hear him. You speak. I remember your eyes, as black as the bottoms of a well. You've grown a beard, but I recognize you." The principal felt something growing in him and remembered how he had been feeling lately, deciding to move on immediately. It was not too late to find another dwelling, or, if he came to that, he would sleep in the open under his cloak. I don't have time to play games, he said. It's growing late. He turned his mount and was on the point of moving out of the little yard when the girl spoke again. Wait. He turned his mount and halted. I didn't mean you couldn't stay here. It would be an honor. Not without your father's permission, he said. They might come back and decide to turn me out. They won't be back till tomorrow, she said. And they would be honored too. The principal took a deep breath and considered. Clearly this girl knew him, and she seemed to be infatuated with him. Given that her fathers were gone, and given his own rising compulsion, he knew fully what the outcome would be if he stayed here. But she was willing, although she didn't know what she was getting into, and he was tired and lonely, and suddenly he knew he would stay, and the consequences go to the Dinas. Very well, he said, returning to the doorway. He dismounted. You are a very observant girl. To have recognized me. He pulled off the false beard. The girl looked at him, blinking, then sank to her knees. Great Dina, don't do that, he said. It's barbaric. She scrambled to her feet, then looked at the ground. What's your name? He asked. Lena, she said. How old are you? 13. We almost got to chapter 5, but we are going to stop it right there. I don't know what's going to happen, but this is getting really interesting. If you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe. Also, this book is part of a trilogy, so if you like this book, then maybe you'll like the other books in the trilogy. They are Pandora's Genes, which is this one, Pandora's Children, and Pandora's Promise. So, yeah. Also, and if you want to get copies of the book, then most booksellers probably have it. Anyways, if you want to support me in any way, all that information is in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.